Welcome to today's deep dive. Um, our mission today is to explore a really supportive and honestly highly practical framework for overcoming stagnation.
Yeah, which is something, absolutely everyone deals with at some
Oh,
point.
exactly. We're drawing from a concise but just super powerful piece of writing called Get Unstuck for Your Life to Flow. And, if you're listening to this right now, chances are you know the exact feeling we're talking about.
That really heavy sort of sinking feeling.
Yes, exactly. It's that immense physical and mental weight. Like, um, it's the sensation of sitting at your desk, you're staring at a screen with 100 things to do, but you are literally unable to bring yourself to start a single one.
Right. Or even on a larger scale, like a major life choice.
Yeah, like a relationship or a career path.
Uh,
A major transition where every single possible direction just feels like, I don't know, running face first into a brick wall.
it's exhausting just thinking about it, honestly.
It really is. So today we're going to unpack how you can regain momentum and find clarity when you're feeling entirely stalled out like that. And I think the most relieving part of this entire framework is the central premise.
Which is so counterintuitive.
It really is. Getting unstuck doesn't start with taking massive, dramatic action. It actually starts with the exact opposite. It begins with simply sitting down and asking yourself one specific, highly focused question.
Which, like I said, is a remarkably counterintuitive approach when you consider human nature, right?
Yeah, how so?
Well, when we feel that heavy sensation of being stalled, our absolute human default is to fight it. We want to push harder, thrash around, and just do something like anything to break the tension.
Just to feel like we're doing something.
Exactly. The psychological state of being stuck is fascinating because it's rarely a lack of energy. It's usually a misdirection of energy.
Well, that makes a lot of sense.
Right. We experience a form of cognitive overload where the brain perceives the obstacle as an actual threat, and that triggers this, mild fight or flight response.
I was actually thinking about that exact instinct to thrash around,
Hmm.
and I want to try an analogy out on you to see if it, captures what's happening neurologically here.
Okay, yeah, let's hear it.
Think about what happens when you get your car stuck in the mud. Your very first instinct is to just hit the gas. Right.
Oh, absolutely. You just want out.
Yeah, you desperately want forward momentum. But by giving in to that instinct, the tires spin, the engine revs, mud flies everywhere, and all you actually accomplish is digging the car much, much deeper into the rut.
That is a perfect image that perfectly illustrates the danger of action without direction.
Right, because you feel like you're doing something, but you're just making it worse.
Exactly.
Right.
When your foot is slammed on the gas pedal in that mud pit, your brain's working memory is entirely consumed by the panic of the problem.
Just totally overload.
Yeah, because in cognitive psychology, working memory can only hold like a handful of items at any given time. So when you're stuck, the problem itself, the mud, the spinning tires, the fact that you aren't moving it, takes up all of that mental bandwidth.
Wow, so you literally can't think of a solution.
You can't. Your field of vision narrows entirely to the threat. And that hyper-focus on the problem is what creates that state of mental paralysis. You're physically expending energy, but strategically, you are completely frozen.
So the framework we're exploring today is essentially begging us to stop spinning the tires. It points out that the only way to actually get the car out of the mud is to do the complete opposite of that initial instinct.
Right, you have to let go.
Yeah, you have to take your foot off the gas, you have to turn off the engine, open the door, step out of the car, and actually look at the terrain. The very first step to getting unstuck is literally to just sit down and think.
And, the power of that physical and mental pause just cannot be overstated. By choosing to step away, you're creating a neurological circuit breaker.
A circuit breaker. I like that.
Yeah, because you're literally shifting the blood flow in your brain away from the amygdala.
Which is the panic center, right?
Exactly, the part driving that panicked, tire-spinning reaction. And you're redirecting it to the prefrontal cortex, which governs logic, planning, problem-solving, all that good stuff.
So you're basically telling your brain to calm down.
You're signaling to your own nervous system that you are no longer blindly pushing against a threat. You are transitioning from this, defensive posture of reacting to an offensive posture of strategizing.
Okay, let's unpack this transition.
Yeah.
Because stepping back and taking a breath sounds wonderful in theory. But once you've stepped out of the metaphorical car, once you've paused and stopped spinning your tires, what exactly are you supposed to be thinking about?
That's the million-dollar question.
Because I know my own brain. If I just sit down and reflect on how incredibly stuck I am, I'm just going to spiral into pure anxiety. Idle reflection without structure usually just leads me right back to panic.
And that right there is why unstructured reflection is a trap so many people fall into. They pause, but they just use that pause to, like, admire the size of the mud pit.
Exactly. Wow, this is a lot of mud.
Right. But this framework prevents that by giving us a very specific structural direction for that thinking. It introduces what we can call a focus-based question.
Okay.
The goal here isn't to dwell on the origin of the problem, but to forcefully redirect the brain's processing power.
And the question we need to ask ourselves is just brilliantly simple, but honestly quite demanding. It asks, what exactly do I want out of this situation? What would be the ideal result?
Every single word in that question is doing heavy lifting. What exactly do I want out of this situation? What would be the ideal result?
I have to challenge this slightly, though, just to play devil's advocate for the listener who might be dealing with a genuinely messy, complicated, highly stressful reality right now.
Sure, go for it.
Because when you're deep in the weeds of a crisis, say, your company is facing massive layoffs, or a critical client project is just completely derailing, isn't thinking about an ideal result a bit, I don't know, unrealistic?
You mean like it feels a bit out of touch?
Yeah, it borders on toxic positivity to me. If I'm in a terrible situation, my brain immediately rejects the word ideal as just wishful thinking. Like, my ideal result is that this disaster magically never happened.
That is such a fair pushback, and it highlights a really common misunderstanding of what the word ideal means in a strategic context.
Okay, how so?
Well, we often conflate ideal with magical, but if we look at the underlying mechanics of this framework, it's actually an entirely pragmatic tool. The ideal result isn't a fantasy where the problem doesn't exist.
Right.
It's a navigational coordinate based on the reality you're currently standing in. Think of the navigation system in your car.
Okay, I'm with you.
If you are hopelessly lost in an unfamiliar city, the GPS does not ask you to input how lost you are. It doesn't ask you to rate your frustration or analyze the traffic patterns. It just asks for a destination.
Because the GPS literally cannot generate a route if it doesn't have an endpoint.
Precisely the point. Identifying the ideal result is simply giving your brain the coordinates it needs to calculate a route. And what happens neurologically here is just fascinating.
What happens?
We have this network of neurons in our brain called the reticular activating system, or the RAS.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, and its primary job is to filter the millions of pieces of data around us and only bring what is important to our conscious attention.
Oh, like a bouncer for your brain.
Exactly like a bouncer. So when you're stuck and focused on the problem, your RAS filters for more evidence of the problem. But the moment you define an ideal result, you reprogram that filter.
Wow.
Your brain suddenly starts scanning your environment, your memories, and your resources for literally anything that matches that new coordinate.
That is so interesting. It's the classic phenomenon where, you decide you want to buy a specific type of blue car, and suddenly you see that exact blue car everywhere you go.
Yes.
The cars were always there, but your brain was previously filtering them out because they weren't relevant. So by defining the ideal result, you're telling your brain to start highlighting potential solutions that were just hiding in plain sight.
Exactly. And returning to your point about a crisis, the ideal result scales to the reality of the situation.
Right. It doesn't have to be perfect.
Right. If a project is derailing, the ideal result isn't the project finishes perfectly with zero flaws. The ideal result might simply be we salvage the client relationship and deliver a functional prototype by Friday.
That feels much more manageable.
It is. It's a realistic, concrete destination that immediately shifts your brain from overwhelm to focused problem solving.
That reframing changes everything. Having a clear vision of the destination is just a massive relief.
Okay.
But I think it brings us to the next critical hurdle.
Which is?
How do you actually translate that mental coordinate into practical physical momentum? Like, how do we start getting the car out of the mud without getting overwhelmed all over again by the sheer amount of work it's going to take?
Well, the mechanism of action here is designed specifically to bypass our tendency to overcomplicate things.
Oh, thank goodness.
Once you've identified that desired outcome, the framework suggests you do not try to map out the entire journey. You simply identify your next right move, and then the next.
Your next right move. That phrasing alone takes an immense amount of pressure off the listener. It completely lowers the barrier to entry for just taking action.
Because when we're stuck, our defense mechanism is usually perfectionism. We feel this, overwhelming urge to instantly generate a flawless, comprehensive master plan before we take a single step.
Yes. We convince ourselves that if we can't see all 50 steps of the solution, it's just too dangerous to take step one.
Right, we want the guarantee of success before we commit any energy. But because we're stuck in the mud, our vantage point is terrible. We literally cannot see 50 steps ahead. So we freeze. We revert to doing nothing.
Master plans are really often just sophisticated forms of procrastination, aren't they?
They absolutely are. And the beauty of focusing only on the next right move is that it respects the limits of our current visibility.
That makes a lot of sense.
You only need the destination, that ideal result you defined, and the single immediate action that points your compass in that direction. As you take that step, your vantage point changes, and then the subsequent step naturally reveals itself.
It's exactly like trying to walk across a wide, fast-moving river on a series of stepping stones. If you stand on the bank and try to map out exactly where your foot will be on stone number 20, you will never cross.
No, you just stand there forever.
Right. You don't need to jump to the other side in one bound. You just need to look down, find the very next stone that is solid enough to hold your weight, and step onto it. And once you're standing on that new stone, your angle changes, and the next logical stone becomes visible.
That river analogy perfectly sets up a really crucial concept related to momentum here. The title of the original article we're discussing mentions getting unstuck so your life can flow.
Right, flow.
And the word flow gets thrown around a lot in self-help and productivity circles, often carrying this mystical connotation of an effortless, euphoric state of genius.
Yeah, usually accompanied by visions of, like, an artist painting a masterpiece at 3 in the morning without breaking a sweat.
Uh-huh.
It sounds great, but it's entirely disconnected from my Tuesday afternoon budget spreadsheet.
Exactly. Demystifying flow makes it accessible for everyday life. In the context of this framework, flow is not a sudden rush of magical inspiration.
Okay, what is it then?
Flow is simply the natural mechanical momentum that occurs when small, manageable actions connect logically to a clearly defined desired outcome.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah. When you know the ideal result, stepping stone number one becomes obvious. You step
Yes.
onto it, then stone number two becomes obvious. You take it. That sequential, frictionless movement, where one action naturally dictates the next, that is practical flow.
You're no longer fighting the current, you're just navigating it with intention. Let's address a potential edge case here, though. What happens if someone asks the focus-based question, they define their ideal result, but when they look for the next right move, it still feels impossibly large? Like, what if stepping stone number 1 looks like it requires a 10-foot leap?
That's a great question. If the next move feels paralyzing, it simply means you haven't broken it down enough.
Okay.
The next right move should literally never require a leap of faith. It should be a micro action.
A micro action.
Yeah. If your ideal result is, I need to completely rewrite this business proposal, your next right move isn't write the proposal. That's way too big.
So what is it?
It might be open a blank document and write 3 bullet points. Or it might be email a colleague for the Q3 data. You just keep shrinking the action until the resistance to doing it is lower than the anxiety of staying stuck.
I love that. To ensure we really ground this theory in reality, we should walk through this specific, tangible scenario that was presented in the source material. Because exploring a messy, real-world situation demonstrates how drastically this framework alters decision-making.
Oh, definitely. Applying these abstract psychological concepts to a practical business problem proves the utility of the method.
Right. So the scenario involves a classic management hurdle. Suppose you are a business owner or a team leader, and your current problem is that you are completely stuck on how to recruit your next top employee.
A very common problem.
Very. The hiring process feels overwhelming, past hires haven't worked out, and you're staring at a blank job description document, feeling that familiar paralysis.
And the default instinct, the equivalent of spinning your tires in the mud, would be to panic, copy and paste an old job description, throw it up on a generic job board, and just kind of hope for the best.
But following our framework, you interrupt that instinct. You
Yeah.
stop the engine. You sit down, step away from the panic, and you ask the focus-based question. What exactly do I want out of this situation? What would be the ideal result?
Now, the crucial pivot happens right here. A vague problem definition leads to vague solutions.
Yeah.
If your answer is simply, I need to hire somebody, your brain filter, your reticular activating system just looks for warm bodies. But after taking the time to think, you realize your actual pain point isn't just an empty chair.
Exactly.
Your specific ideal result is recruiting someone who will commit to staying with your company for at least 5 years. You need stability, not just talent.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because that distinction completely changes the game. By demanding a highly specific ideal result of 5-year tenure, the definition of the problem evolves.
It really does.
It shifts from how do I find a candidate
Yeah.
to how do I guarantee long-term stability in this role?
Notice how defining that specific coordinate immediately programs the brain to look for a completely different set of stepping stones. If you want a 5-year commitment, putting a generic ad on a massive public job board is simply no longer the logical next move.
Right, because you'll just get the same churn. The text highlights that once the ideal result is clarified as a 5-year commitment, your next right move might actually be to employ the services of a highly specialized recruitment agency.
Yes.
But not just any agency. You would look for one whose explicit mandate is to vet applicants specifically willing to sign long-term contracts.
Now consider the alternate timeline where the manager didn't pause to ask the question.
Oh boy.
They would have spent weeks sifting through hundreds of mismatched resumes, conducting dozens of draining interviews with candidates who might, leave after 6 months. They would have expended massive amounts of energy only to remain stuck in a cycle of high turnover.
All because they were trying to solve the wrong problem.
Yeah.
It really exposes how much of our feeling of being stuck is actually just a symptom of a lack of precise definition.
Absolutely.
We feel crushed by the weight of a vaguely defined massive problem. But when you sharpen the definition of what you actually want, you inherently shrink the problem down to a manageable size.
The author uses a fantastic metaphor to describe this exact realization, stating that asking this focus-based question leads to opening the gates of solutions.
I love the imagery of a gate because it implies that the solutions already exist in the world. They aren't like magical artifacts you have to invent from scratch.
No, they are simply waiting on the other side. The specialized recruitment agency existed before the manager got stuck. The legal framework for a 5-year contract existed.
They were just hidden.
The solutions were fully formed and available, but the gate to accessing them remained locked until the manager clarified the exact desired result. The focus-based question is literally the key that unlocks the gate.
Because if your goal is just the vague notion of getting unstuck, a gate cannot open for that. A gate doesn't know what to do with a vague request.
Right, it's too broad.
But if your goal is, I need a specialized agency to vet 5-year contracts, your brain immediately recognizes the tool that can help you get it. You make a phone call? That is your next right move. That creates immediate momentum.
It fundamentally changes the narrative we tell ourselves about being stuck. We often believe we're stuck because we lack resources or intelligence or willpower.
Yeah, we blame ourselves.
But most of the time, we are simply stuck because we haven't given our brain clear enough instructions on what to look for.
Well, as we bring this deep dive to a close, I want to offer a calm, encouraging recap for you, the listener. If you are tuning in right now and feeling stalled, whether you're looking at a daunting project, navigating a complex relationship, or facing a major life transition, and you feel that heavy paralysis settling in, remember that escaping it does not require superhuman effort.
Not at all.
It doesn't require a miraculous burst of energy or a perfectly engineered master plan.
Getting unstuck simply requires the courage to stop the engine.
Yes. It requires literally sitting down, taking a breath, and refusing to spin your tires. It requires asking yourself that one clarifying question. What exactly do you want out of this situation?
Yeah.
What is the specific ideal result?
And once you have that single coordinate locked into your mental GPS, you can drop the immense burden of needing to know every step of the journey.
Just drop it entirely.
You just need to look down and identify the very next stepping stone, one right move. That is how you build a genuine plan of action, and that is how you invite practical, sustainable flow back into your life.
The profound beauty of this framework is its universal applicability. Human psychology is remarkably consistent. We all get stuck. We all panic and spin our tires. But this is a universally effective method for stepping out of the mud, regardless of the terrain.
Completely agree.
Whether you are prepping for a really tough meeting, trying to restructure a department, or figuring out your next career move, the sequence is always the same. Pause, define the destination, and find the next right move.
The mechanics of the mind will handle the rest, filtering the noise and highlighting the path forward.
Which leaves us with a final thought to build on what we've discussed today. We talked about how asking the right question leads to opening the gates of solutions, meaning the answers you need are likely already out there, just waiting for you to define them clearly. So think about your own life right now. What locked gate are you currently standing in front of? Exhausted from spinning your tires, simply waiting for you to pause and ask the right question to finally unlock it. Step out of the car, Look at the terrain and ask the question. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.